the South Africa that we have today is definitely not the South Africa that was envisioned in the Freedom Charter for a variety of reasons, sins of omission and commission in a way. I think you can look at everything. I mean, you can look at the issue of land, you can look at the issue of education. We've fallen far short from the Freedom Charter. There is absolutely no doubt about it. We have fallen short of the Constitution. I mean, the commitments that are made in the Constitution itself. I mean, I think if you were to ask, I mean, even the President himself, he will be the first to admit, or his predecessors for that matter, they will be the first to admit that the South Africa that we have today, even though it is much better than the South Africa that we had in 1955, because we should make no claim that the South Africa of 1955 was better than the South Africa of 2025. That is just not true. Our lives are much better today than they were in 1955, but they could be a lot more better, and we're fallen short. But what the Freedom Charter is, and I think what its significance is actually, is that just ordinary people, bringing just ordinary people, they know the South Africa that they want, right? I mean, you could have imagined that after 7 years of apartheid, that those black people would have said, no, actually, we want our country. This country belongs to us. But even though that they've been oppressed for 100 of years, the vision that they had of South Africa included white people. That is the miracle of South Africa that sometimes we do not talk much about. The Freedom Charter was a turning point actually in South African history. I mean, to understand its significance, we just have to go back a bit, because what had happened in South African politics before 1955, which was the moment of the Freedom Charter, is that how black people had resisted before, I mean, and had pressed their political claims for equality. It was through sending delegations to government, basically, we want our political rights type of a thing. So it is from 1949 when things change a bit, where black people start saying we need to mobilize and organize ourselves, I mean, and be more assertive about our political rights. And I think the significant moment there, firstly, was the 1949 program of action by the ANC, right, which had come from the ANC Youth League. So you have the ANC adopting the program of action, which was calling for more assertive claims, in a sense, that Africans needed to fight for their political rights. They did not need to beg anyone, right? So that is 1949. Then the second moment is 1952, because what had happened in the ANC, it was effectively taken over by young people like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, who was the Secretary General of the ANC from then. Then Chief Albert Luthuli was elected as President General of the ANC. And so in 1952, the ANC has the Defiance Campaign. So it starts defying government. I mean, which was the first time in the history of black people's resistance to their political exclusion that they came out and said, arrest us then. Effectively, this is what 1952 is about. I mean, and of course they got arrested. I mean, so what is significant about 1955 is that they are moving away from just resisting, protesting. They are saying, let us provide an alternative vision. If what is going on, if we do not like what is going on, what is it that we stand for? What is it that we like? Just 3 days before the 26th of June, 1955, there had been a meeting in Tongat in Durban of the leadership, after they had collected all of these demands and suggestions from ordinary people. Then they put them together. Who was there? Who was at that meeting in the town, coastal town of Tongat? It was the leadership of the African National Congress. It was the leadership of the South African Indian Congress. It was the leadership of the South African Congress of Trade Unions. So of all of these people were coming together saying, okay, now that Z. Matthews had suggested that we needed to have this Congress of the people that will give an alternative vision, so that we are not just only fighting against something, but we are fighting for something. What is this something that they were fighting for? They called it the Freedom Charter. And the first thing that they said in that charter, they said South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And it is there in the South African Constitution. The Congress, I mean, that was significant to call it the Congress of the People, because all of these organizations that came together, and I've already mentioned some of the organizations, the ANC was one of them, the South African Indian Congress was another, the Congress of Democrats, I mean, it was there, an organization representing the Coloureds, the Congress, I mean, the Colored Congress was also there. So it was an amalgamation of different organizations coming together. That is the reason why they called themselves the Congress Alliance, right? It was not one organization, even though the ANC was a dominant of all the organizations involved, but it was not one organization. So as they assembled all of these representatives of the people who were coming from towns and villages to Cape Town in Soweto, they called that assembly of people, that congregation of people who had come to say what they stood for, they called it the Congress of the People, responding to the call that Professor Zach Matthews had made 3 years before in 1953, that let's get all of the people to come together and tell us about the South Africa that they wanted. And they put it in these principles that were called the Freedom Charter. I remember in 1922, I mean, there was a commission. It said black people could only be allowed in the urban centers in South Africa for one purpose and one purpose alone: to minister after the interests of white people. If a black person in an urban setting like Johannesburg, Pretoria, or Cape Town could not do that, minister after the interests of white people, they had to go back. And so the vision that won in 1948, the apartheid vision, was exactly that black people needed to be sent away to reserves, far away from the urban centers of South Africa. And so what the Freedom Charter was an antidote to that vision of South Africa. South Africa is a divided country, with white people enjoying the privileges in the cities and other urban centers, and black people being confined to the villages and waiting to be called to come to the city to administer after the interests of white people. What the Freedom Charter says, those people, what they say, but actually, this country does not belong to one community. This country belongs to all of us, but they do not end there, right? They talk about the mineral resources of this country, that they belong to all of us. They talk about the doors of learning. And I think what was interesting, they did not say this country belonged to black people. I mean, they could have justifiably said this country belongs to black people, but they did not say this country belongs to black people. They said this country belongs to all of us, black and white. And our constitution takes it a step further. It says Africa belongs to us, black and white, united in our diversity. The National Party had won 7 years before. It had implemented laws that went against the grain of the vision of South Africa as a united society. The national dialogue is taking place at a moment of crisis, again in South Africa, where the vision of South Africa as a prosperous, non-racial country, a country of shared prosperity, that vision has lost momentum in a way. We seem to be a society that is adrift, that is overwhelmed by its own problems and challenges. And so there is this idea that let ordinary people come together and in a sense bring a new spirit, new ideas, because it appears sometimes that those who have been entrusted with the responsibility of leading us sometimes, that they do not have the answers. We have been a democracy now, an inclusive democracy for more than 30 years. So I do think this idea that ordinary people, should be engaged in a dialogue. I attended an event yesterday evening where the former President Mbeki was saying the expectation from the national dialogue is that ordinary South Africans, including those who are elected, who are in power, they will meet together and tell us about the South Africa we want and the South Africa that we do not want, right? And so I do think that there are very interesting similarities between these moments in South African history that have been occasioned by the crisis that we face, because South Africa today faces a fundamental crisis. We do not know whether South Africa will survive, as an inclusive democracy in the next 10, 20 years. And that is what the dialogue is about. Perhaps the difference, and I think that is where perhaps we'll have to be careful a bit, is to make sure that elite interests do not dominate the conversation at the national dialogue, because otherwise it will become the same things. Because it's not as if we do not know what our political leaders say. What has necessitated the dialogue that has been called is because what the political elite has brought to the table has not solved the fundamental problems that South Africa faces. And so that is the reason why there is this convening of literally representatives of the people, ordinary people, to come and chart a path forward.
Does it not make it useless though? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have elections in a year's time. And whatever resolutions are there at the national dialogue, the DA is going to have its own message, the ANC will have its own message, EFF, all these parties will have their own message. It's unlike in the Freedom Charter where all these organizations came out with one message. In an inclusive democracy, no one is gonna, I suspect that no one is going to take whatever message that comes out from the national dialogue and have it. All these parties will have their different messages. Does that not make it a bit redundant?
Well, I think a part of it we have to accept that in a diverse society like South Africa, people will have different opinions about. And I think in many ways it is the beauty and strength of South Africa that people have different opinions about all matter of things, and that is acceptable. And that is the reason why we have as many political parties as we do. I think I take heart from what the President has said, that the resolutions of the national dialogue will become the either program or the policy of government. And I think given that all the political parties would participate in the national dialogue, that to me is encouraging. But as you know, in democratic politics, how these big decisions are decided, it is through elections, right? Political parties come with their manifestos, and then ordinary people decide, they make a choice. They say this is what we like, and that is how democracies work. We have the National Development Plan in South Africa, which is perhaps not it's not been implemented perhaps to our satisfaction. It says a lot of good things. So we have to make sure that the resolutions of the national dialogue do not get trapped. In the same trap that the National Development Plan got trapped to. So where it becomes a slogan, the NDP, but the actual implementation, the hard choices that need to be made are not made. So I think that is the danger about the national dialogue, that it could just be a talk shop, right, where everyone talks and then the following day nothing happens. But I think there is a promise about that we can draw from the Freedom Charter, that this document that was developed by people without power has had such an enduring impact. 70 years after the fact, that actually when you bring together just ordinary people, they might really surprise you, like come up with something that is serious around which we can organize society. So the critical question, I think, for the national dialogue is whether it will emulate what happened with the Freedom Charter and come up with an inspirational vision that can galvanize all South Africans beyond their political differences. Because after all, we may hold different views, about this country, but this is our home. The future of this country lies in shared prosperity, right? Making sure that all of us individually and collectively, we think we have a stake and we work hard to make sure that South Africa is successful.